The world for a 12-year-old boy should be a universe of scraped knees, homework, and whispered secrets with friends. It should be a place of simple certainties. The sun rises, the school bell rings, and a father's love is a fortress. But for Leo, that fortress had begun to show cracks. His world was shrinking, its colors fading to the muted gray of their tiny, damp apartment, the constant worry in his father's eyes, and the hollow echo in the pantry. His father, Ethan, was a man carved from oak, once strong and towering, now confined to a wheelchair. A permanent storm cloud of pain settled behind his brow. The accident, a nebulous event from years ago that Leo only understood in whispers and shadows, had not just taken the use of Ethan's legs, it had stolen the light from his soul. Still, Ethan fought. He was a freelance bookkeeper, his once brilliant mind now wrestling with small-town ledgers and tax forms for a pittance. But lately, the phone had stopped ringing. The work had dried up, and the silence in their small home had grown heavy, thick with unspoken fears. Leo saw it all. He was a boy with old eyes, a quiet observer who noticed the way his father would skip a meal, claiming he wasn't hungry, or the way his hand would tremble when he opened a bill. Ethan would disappear for hours each afternoon, saying he needed fresh air, a change of scenery. He'd put on a hooded sweatshirt, pulling the drawstrings tight around his face, and wheel himself out into the city's indifferent streets, promising to be back before dark. But he always came back looking smaller, more defeated, the fortress of his spirit crumbling brick by brick. A seed of suspicion, cold and sharp, planted itself in Leo's heart. Where did he go? What fresh air was so punishing that it left his father looking so utterly broken? One Tuesday, the gray sky weeping a miserable drizzle, Leo decided he had to know. He stuffed his worn backpack with a textbook he didn't intend to read and followed, his small frame melting into the afternoon crowds. He kept a careful distance, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He watched his father navigate the cracked sidewalks, his movements weary, each push of the wheels a monumental effort. Ethan didn't go to the park. He didn't go to the library. He wheeled himself into the city's bustling downtown, a place of gleaming towers and hurried, important people. He stopped on a corner, across from a grand, marble-faced bank, a river of expensive suits and leather briefcases flowing past him. And then, Leo watched his world shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Ethan, his strong, proud father, the man who had taught him that integrity was the only currency that truly mattered, pulled the hood of his sweatshirt lower, obscuring his face completely. He took a battered tin cup from a bag at his side and placed it on the ground before him. He held up a small, cardboard sign, the words scrawled in a shaky hand that Leo didn't recognize as his father's. Anything helps. God bless. Leo froze, the textbook in his bag suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds. He couldn't breathe. The sounds of the city, the traffic, the chatter, the distant siren, all faded into a deafening roar in his ears. That couldn't be his father. His father was a giant, a man who read him stories about kings and heroes, a man whose pride was a mountain. But it was him. Leo recognized the worn fabric of his jacket, the gnarled knuckles on the hand holding the sign, the heartbreaking slump of his shoulders. He watched as people streamed by, their faces blank, their eyes fixed forward, stepping around the obstacle of a broken man as if he were a piece of trash on the pavement. A woman in a fur coat glanced down, her lip curling in disgust before she hurried on. A man talking loudly on his phone nearly tripped over the wheelchair, swearing under his breath without a backward glance. Each person who ignored him, each look of disdain, was a physical blow to Leo. He felt a hot, shameful tear slide down his cheek. His father was not just paralyzed. He was invisible. He was begging. The shame was quickly consumed by a wave of love so fierce it almost buckled his knees. His father was doing this for him. For them. To keep a roof over their heads, to put food on their table. This wasn't weakness, it was the most painful, humiliating act of love Leo had ever witnessed. He couldn't bear it. He turned and ran, the tears coming freely now, hot and blinding. He didn't stop until he was back at their apartment building, fumbling with the key, his small body shaking with a sorrow too vast for his years. He had seen the truth, and it was a truth that had carved a deep, jagged canyon right through the heart of his childhood. The fortress had fallen. The key finally turned in the lock, and Leo stumbled inside, the silence of the empty apartment amplifying the storm inside him. He sank onto the floor, his back against the cool wood of the front door, and let the sobs rack his body. He cried for his father's lost pride, for the cruelty of the world, for the gnawing hunger in their bellies that had driven his hero to a street corner. An hour passed, or maybe it was a lifetime. The sound of wheels on the worn linoleum of the hallway announced Ethan's return. The door pushed open, bumping gently against Leo's back. Ethan paused, his weary eyes finding his son huddled on the floor. A flicker of confusion, then dawning, horrified understanding crossed his face. He knew. The boy knew. "Leo," he asked, his voice a raw whisper. "What is it? What's wrong?" Leo couldn't speak. He just looked up, his face swollen and streaked with tears, his eyes holding the terrible knowledge he now carried. The sight broke through the last of Ethan's defenses. His face, a mask of weary resolve moments before, crumpled. The proud set of his shoulders collapsed, and he bowed his head, a single, choked sob escaping him. He wheeled himself further into the room, not meeting his son's gaze. "You saw me," he stated, the words heavy as stones. Leo nodded, unable to form a word. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with shame. "Leo, I am so sorry you had to see that." He finally looked at his son, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "The last bookkeeping client, they let me go. Said they were streamlining. There's nothing left. The eviction notice came last week. We have until the end of the month." The confession hung in the air, a final, devastating blow. This was it. This was the bottom. Ethan's hands clenched and unclenched on the arms of his wheelchair. "I didn't know what else to do," he said, his voice cracking. "I had to try something. For you." He expected anger, maybe disgust or disappointment. He was prepared for his son to look at him with a stranger's eyes. But that's not what happened. Leo slowly got to his feet, his small face set with a resolve that mirrored the one Ethan himself used to have. He walked over to his father, wrapped his arms around his neck, and held on tight. He wasn't hugging a broken man, he was hugging his dad, his hero, the center of his universe. "It's okay, Dad," Leo whispered into his father's shoulder, his voice trembling but firm. "You don't have to be sorry. It's not your fault." Ethan's breath hitched, and he hugged his son back, burying his face in Leo's hair, the carefully constructed dam of his emotions finally bursting. The two of them stayed like that for a long time, a father and son clinging to each other in the wreckage of their lives, their shared tears a testament to a love that refused to be broken. When they finally pulled apart, Leo looked his father directly in the eye. The fear and sorrow in his own gaze had been replaced by a fiery determination. "No more," he said, his voice quiet but ringing with the force of an unbreakable oath. "You will never have to do that again. I'm going to fix this. I promise you, Dad. I'll take care of you. We won't be poor anymore. I promise." Ethan looked at his 12-year-old son, at the fierce loyalty burning in his eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was a tiny, fragile spark of hope, lit by the unwavering love of his boy. It was in this moment of shared vulnerability and renewed commitment that the story truly began. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? Let us know in the comments below, and let's share in this journey of hope together. The promise Leo made was not a child's idle wish, it was a declaration of war against their circumstances. He felt a fire in his belly he'd never known before, an energy born of love and desperation. The next morning, Leo woke with a sense of purpose that felt strange and heavy in his small chest. His father's promise echoed in his mind. But how? How could a 12-year-old boy change their entire world? He looked around their sparse room, his eyes scanning for anything of value. There was nothing. Just worn furniture, threadbare blankets, and the palpable presence of poverty. Then his gaze fell upon a small object sitting on his nightstand. It was a wooden bird, no bigger than his palm, carved from a single piece of light-colored wood. Its wings were outstretched as if in mid-flight, each feather rendered with an impossible, breathtaking detail. His father had carved it for him years ago, before the accident, in a time when his hands were not just for bookkeeping, but for creating magic. It was Leo's most treasured possession, a tangible link to a happier past. It was all he had. With a heavy heart, he knew what he had to do. He gently wrapped the bird in a clean cloth and tucked it into his pocket. He left a note for his father, who was still asleep, the exhaustion of his emotional confession having granted him a rare, deep rest. Went to the library. Be back soon. Love, Leo. It was a small lie, but a necessary one. He couldn't let his dad know what he was about to do. He walked downtown, back to the very place where his heart had been broken the day before. The streets were just as crowded, the faces just as indifferent. He found a small space near a storefront, took a deep breath, and unwrapped the bird. He cupped it in his hands, holding it out for the world to see. He felt a hot blush of shame creep up his neck. He was just a boy with a toy. People rushed past, a blur of motion and noise. No one gave him a second glance. An hour crawled by. His arm began to ache. His hope, so fierce that morning, started to fray at the edges. A man in a sharp, tailored suit, talking on a phone pressed to his ear, strode towards him. He didn't even look down. His expensive shoe caught the edge of Leo's foot, sending him stumbling. The wooden bird flew from his grasp, landing with a sickening splash in a grimy puddle of street water. "Watch where you're going, kid," the man snarled, his voice dripping with arrogance and impatience. He didn't break his stride, disappearing into the crowd without a backward glance. Leo stared, his heart seizing in his chest. The man's face, etched with cruel indifference, was burned into his memory. He knelt, his knees soaking into the cold, damp pavement, and reached a trembling hand into the filthy water. He pulled out the bird. It was stained and dripping. A tiny piece of one wing had chipped off. A choked sob escaped him. It was ruined. His one hope, his last treasure, was broken and worthless. He huddled there on the sidewalk, the cold seeping into his bones, tears of frustration and despair beginning to well in his eyes. He had failed. His promise was just empty words. "Is this yours?" a soft voice asked. Leo looked up. A woman was standing over him. She had kind eyes, the color of warm honey, and a gentle smile that seemed entirely out of place in the harsh landscape of the city. She was pointing at the sullied bird in his hand. Leo just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "I saw what happened," she said, her voice laced with sympathy. She knelt beside him, ignoring the dirty pavement. "That man was horribly rude. Are you all right?" Leo shook his head, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "It's ruined," he whispered. "It was for my dad." The woman looked at the bird, then back at Leo. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "The craftsmanship is incredible. Your father made this?" Leo nodded again. "He used to." The woman reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. "How much are you asking for it?" she asked. Leo was stunned. "But it's broken. And dirty." "A little water can be wiped away," she said, her smile widening. "And a small chip doesn't take away from the beauty of the whole piece. It just gives it a story." She pulled out a crisp $50 bill and held it out to him. Leo's eyes went wide. $50. It was more money than he had seen in months. It was enough for groceries for a week, maybe more. I can't," he stammered. It's not worth that much. To me, it is, she insisted, pressing the bill into his hand. I collect unique art. And this, she said, gently taking the dripping bird from his other hand, is very unique. Please. Let me buy it. Leo stared at the money in his hand, then at the woman's kind face. In a world that had shown him only indifference and cruelty, this one person had stopped. She had seen him. This single, unexpected act of kindness felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. It was a lifeline. Leo stared at the $50 bill in his hand, a piece of paper that felt as heavy and significant as a gold bar. He looked from the money to the woman's warm, smiling face. Thank you, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. The woman carefully wiped the wooden bird with a tissue from her purse, her movements gentle and respectful. My name is Clara, she said. What's yours? Leo. It's a pleasure to meet you, Leo. You said this was for your father? Clara's curiosity was genuine. There was something about this boy, his quiet dignity, his deep, sorrowful eyes, that moved her. And the bird, even chipped and damp, spoke of a skill, a passion, that was profound. It wasn't just a carving, it was a piece of a soul. Leo hesitated. His father's pride was a fierce, wounded thing. He didn't like anyone knowing their business, let alone a stranger. But Clara wasn't just any stranger. She hadn't looked at him with pity or disgust. She had looked at him with respect. Yes, Leo said finally. He's sick. We needed money for food. The confession was quiet, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap in Clara's heart. She was a doctor. She ran a small, underfunded clinic for those who fell through the cracks of the healthcare system. She saw desperation every day, but the sight of this earnest young boy trying to sell his treasure to feed his sick father struck a particularly painful chord. The man who carved this, Clara said, holding the bird up to the light, he has a remarkable talent. Is he able to work? Leo shook his head, his gaze dropping to the pavement. He's in a wheelchair. He had an accident a long time ago. He tries to work from home, but it's been hard. Clara's mind started working. She saw the puzzle pieces, a talented man, a debilitating injury, a struggle with poverty, a fiercely loyal son. This wasn't just a sad story, it was a problem to be solved. This is what she did. She fixed things. Or at least, she tried. Leo, she said, her tone shifting from sympathetic stranger to gentle authority. I'm a doctor. I might be able to help your father. Or at least, take a look and offer some advice. I wouldn't charge anything, of course. Leo's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Strangers didn't just offer free medical care. Life had taught him that every helping hand usually came with a price tag attached. He remembered his father's warnings about taking charity, the way it could chip away at a man's soul. But he also remembered the desperation in his father's eyes on that street corner. He remembered the promise he had made. I don't know, he mumbled. My dad, he doesn't like help. I understand, Clara said patiently. Pride is a powerful thing. But sometimes, accepting help is the strongest thing a person can do. For themselves, and for the people they love. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a simple business card. It read, Dr. Clara Vance. The Community Care Clinic. Below it was a phone number and an address. She handed it to Leo. Here, she said. No pressure at all. But if you or your father change your mind, give me a call. I'd be happy to make a house call. Sometimes it's easier to talk in a familiar place. Leo took the card, its crisp edges a stark contrast to the worn $50 bill in his other hand. A house call. A doctor coming to them. It was an unheard of luxury. A glimmer of a possibility, a path he hadn't even known existed, opened up before him. He looked at Clara, at her sincere eyes and the genuine concern etched on her face. For the second time that day, he felt seen. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay. I'll ask him." He clutched the card and the money in his hand, a new kind of hope taking root in his chest. It was no longer the desperate, frantic hope of a child alone, but the shared, collaborative hope that comes when one person reaches out to another in the dark. He had gone out to find money for food, and he was coming home with something far more valuable, a chance. Clutching the $50 bill and Dr. Vance's business card, Leo all but ran home, his heart a frantic, hopeful drum. He burst through the door to find Ethan sitting by the window, a book open on his lap, though Leo knew he hadn't been reading. He'd been worrying. "Leo. Where have you been? The library for 3 hours?" Ethan's voice was sharp with anxiety. Leo took a deep breath and opened his hand, revealing the money and the card. "I didn't go to the library, Dad. I'm sorry I lied. I went to sell the wooden bird you made me." Ethan's face paled. The anger in his eyes was instantly replaced by a deep, aching hurt. "Leo, no. Why would you do that? That was yours. I made that for you." "We needed food," Leo said simply, his voice unwavering. And then something happened. A man knocked it into a puddle and it got chipped. "I thought it was ruined. But then this woman bought it. She gave me $50 for it. And she's a doctor. She said she wants to help." He held out the business card like a holy relic. Ethan stared at the card, then at the money, then back at his son's earnest, hopeful face. His first instinct was to refuse. His pride, that old, stubborn shield, rose up inside him. He didn't want charity. He didn't want a stranger's pity. He had been a man who provided, a man who solved his own problems. The accident had taken so much, but he had clung to his self-reliance like a life raft. Now, even that was being stripped away. But then he looked at Leo. He saw the desperate hope in his son's eyes, the plea for him to just say yes. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about the promise Leo saw in that little white card. To refuse would be to extinguish that fragile flame. "All right," Ethan said, the word tasting foreign and bitter in his mouth. She can come." 2 days later, a gentle knock came at their door. It was Clara. She was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, a medical bag in her hand. She smiled warmly at Leo, who opened the door, and then her eyes fell on Ethan. He sat in his wheelchair, his arms crossed, his expression guarded and unwelcoming. The air in the small apartment was thick with tension. "Mr. Collins," Clara said, her voice calm and professional. "I'm Dr. Vance. It's good to meet you. Leo told me a bit about your situation." "He shouldn't have," Ethan said, his voice flat. "We're fine." "Dad," Leo whispered, tugging on his father's sleeve. Clara didn't flinch at his gruffness. She had seen this wall 1,000 times before. It was a wall built of pain, fear, and a deep-seated sense of loss. "The bird you carved is on my desk at the clinic," she said, changing the subject. "Everyone who sees it is amazed. You have an incredible gift." A flicker of something, surprise, maybe even a ghost of pride, passed through Ethan's eyes before he suppressed it. "I don't do that anymore," he muttered. Clara nodded, undeterred. "Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a look at your medical records, if you have them. And maybe ask you a few questions." Reluctantly, Ethan directed her to a dusty folder of paperwork. As Clara reviewed the files, old diagnoses, physical therapy reports that ended abruptly, prescriptions that had long since lapsed, she began to see a story. The initial prognosis after the construction site accident was grim, but not entirely hopeless. He was told he would likely never walk again, but the follow-up care, the intensive, multi-year physical therapy he would have needed, was something his meager settlement could never cover. He had been written off. She performed a gentle examination, checking his reflexes, muscle tone, and sensation. Ethan remained silent and stiff throughout, enduring her touch as if it were an indictment. "You have some residual nerve function," she said finally, her voice thoughtful. "It's faint, but it's there." "Mr. Collins." "Ethan, have you been told that with intensive, targeted neurophysiotherapy, there's a possibility you could regain some mobility?" Ethan let out a short, bitter laugh. "Possibility? A doctor told me there was a possibility I could win the lottery, too. He also told me that kind of therapy costs more than I'll see in 10 lifetimes." It was a nice way of saying tough luck. The raw bitterness in his voice struck Clara. It reminded her of why she had left a lucrative job at a prestigious city hospital. She had grown sick of watching a patient's financial status determine their outcome. She had seen too many tough luck cases, too many people abandoned by a system that prized profit over people. "There are programs," she began, "and grants. I'm not a charity case." Dr. Ethan cut her off, his voice cold as ice. The flicker of hope was gone, buried again under years of disappointment. He was a man drowning in the past, and he was refusing the lifeline she was offering. Clara looked from his hard, set face to Leo's, who was watching them with wide, worried eyes. She knew she couldn't push. Not yet. The walls around Ethan's heart were too high, too thick. But she had found a crack. A faint, but definite, possibility. And for Clara, that was more than enough to begin. Clara understood that healing was about more than just medicine, it was about trust. And trust was a currency Ethan Collins had long since run out of. So she changed her approach. She didn't come back with charts and medical jargon. She came back with 2 bags of groceries. "I was at the market and they had a 2-for-1 deal," she said with a breezy smile, placing the bags on their small kitchen counter before Ethan could protest. "I'll never get through all this myself." It was a lie, but a kind one, and the sight of fresh vegetables and milk was a more powerful argument than any she could make. She started visiting every few days. Sometimes she'd bring food. Sometimes she'd bring a new book for Leo, or a challenging crossword puzzle for Ethan, knowing his mind was still sharp and hungry. She never mentioned his medical condition. Instead, she talked about her day at the clinic, the funny thing a patient had said, her frustration with bureaucracy. She slowly, carefully, became a part of the quiet rhythm of their lives. She was building a bridge, one small act of kindness at a time. Ethan remained guarded, but the ice in his eyes began to thaw. He started responding to her questions, then asking his own. He found himself looking forward to the sound of her gentle knock. Leo, meanwhile, adored her. She was a beacon of light in their gray world. One afternoon, while Clara was helping Leo organize a bookshelf, he pulled a dusty cardboard box from the back of a closet. "What's this?" he asked. Ethan, who was sitting nearby, tensed. "It's nothing, Leo. Just old junk. Put it back." But Leo's curiosity was piqued. He opened the box. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed papers, was a heavy, old laptop and several thick notebooks filled with what looked like a foreign language, page after page of complex equations, diagrams, and lines of elegant, handwritten code. "Wow," Leo breathed, tracing a finger over a complex schematic. "What is all this, Dad?" A profound sadness settled over Ethan's features. He looked at the notebooks, and it was as if a ghost from another life had walked into the room. Clara watched him, her expression soft and questioning. "It's from before," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. "Before the accident." He looked at Clara, then at Leo, and something inside him seemed to break open. The story, the one he had buried for so long under a mountain of pain and shame, came pouring out. "I wasn't a bookkeeper," he began, his voice trembling. "I was a software architect. My partner, Marcus, and we were on the verge of something big. Something that was going to change everything." His eyes took on a distant, fiery light as he spoke. "It was a green energy management system. An AI protocol I designed called Helios. It could optimize a power grid in real time, cutting energy waste by over 40%. It was my life's work. It was going to make clean energy not just viable, but more profitable than fossil fuels. Clara listened, captivated. This was the man who had carved that bird. This was the soul trapped inside the broken body. We were about to secure our final round of funding, Ethan continued, his voice growing tight with anger. Marcus handled the business side. I handled the code. I trusted him. He was my best friend. He paused, taking a ragged breath. The day before the big meeting, he lured me to a new construction site for one of our potential investors. He said we needed to survey it. He knew the site was unstable. There was a scaffolding collapse. That's what the report said. It was no accident, Clara. He pushed me. The ugly truth, spoken aloud for the first time, hung in the air. Leo gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. While I was in the hospital, fighting for my life, Marcus cleaned out our joint accounts, filed the patent for Helios under his name alone, and told the investors I'd had a breakdown and quit. He used a sliver of the money to pay me a pathetic workplace injury settlement, just enough to keep me from suing. He bought my silence and my future for pennies. He left me paralyzed and took everything. He finally looked up, and the name he spoke was filled with a venom that had been brewing for 7 long years. His name is Marcus Thorne. His company, Thorne Industries, is one of the biggest tech firms in the world now. And it was all built on my back. Built on my life. The room was silent, save for the sound of Ethan's ragged breathing. Leo stared at his father, his mind reeling. The man who knocked his wooden bird into a puddle. The man with the cruel, arrogant face. That was Marcus Thorne. The man who had destroyed his father's life. And in that moment, Leo understood. The truth wasn't just that his dad was paralyzed and poor. The truth was that his father was a genius, a visionary, a king who had been robbed of his kingdom by a man who was pure evil. The truth left him utterly, completely stunned. The weight of the revelation settled over the small apartment, a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. Leo stared at his father, not with pity, but with a new, awe-filled respect. His dad wasn't just a victim, he was the creator of something magnificent. Clara, ever the pragmatist, felt a surge of righteous anger, but her mind was already moving past the shock and toward a solution. He stole it, she said, her voice steely. But you created it. Every line of code, every algorithm. Is there no proof? Ethan let out a hollow laugh. The proof is in those notebooks. In my head. But what good is that? He has an army of lawyers. I have this, he said, gesturing around the threadbare room. It's my word against a billionaire's. The world has already chosen who to believe. He looked at the old, dusty laptop Leo had pulled from the box. Everything was on there. The final build, all my notes, my digital signatures embedded in the source code. But the hard drive was corrupted after the fall. I tried for months to recover it, but it was hopeless. I had to sell my equipment just to pay rent. It's all gone. But Leo, whose world had just been reshaped by this incredible truth, refused to accept defeat. His faith in his father was absolute. He walked over to the old laptop, his eyes shining with a fierce, unwavering belief. But you're a genius, Dad, he said, the words simple and profound. You told me once that any problem can be solved if you look at it from the right angle. You can fix it. I know you can. The simple, pure faith in his son's voice struck a chord deep within Ethan. It was a belief he hadn't had in himself for a very long time. He looked at the notebooks, at the elegant, flowing script of his own creation. He remembered the thrill of the work, the joy of building something from nothing. And then, a memory sparked in the darkness of his mind. A fail-safe. A back door he had built into the very heart of the Helios protocol. Marcus was a great salesman, Ethan said slowly, his eyes distant, his mind racing back through years of forgotten work. But he was never a brilliant coder. He was sloppy. He always looked for the shortcut. He could implement the system, but he could never understand it at its deepest level. Not like I do. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips for the first time in years. I was always paranoid about security. I built in a key. A digital ghost in the machine. A self-destruct sequence and data recovery protocol that could only be activated by a unique alphanumeric sequence, a sequence tied to a series of personal dates only I would know. Clara leaned forward, her heart pounding. You mean you can shut it down? Better, Ethan said, the fire returning to his eyes. I can reclaim it. The protocol is designed to freeze the entire system, archive every bit of data, and transfer ownership of the master source code to a new designated server. It would cut him off completely. All I need to do is access the core system and input the sequence. The hope was dazzling, almost blinding. But reality quickly set in. But how? Ethan's face fell. This laptop is a relic. The hard drive is fried. I'd need a modern machine, data recovery software, a clean room environment to even attempt to pull the data off the old platters. It's impossible. It would take thousands of dollars we don't have. The brief, brilliant flare of hope seemed to die as quickly as it had been born. They were so close, yet an impassable financial wall stood between them and justice. But they were no longer just a broken man and his son. They were a team of three. Clara stood up, her face set with a powerful determination. No, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. It's not impossible. She looked at Ethan, then at Leo, her gaze unwavering. I don't have much, but I have savings. I was putting it away for a down payment on a house one day. But a house is just bricks and mortar. Justice is a foundation you can build a life on. She pulled out her phone and began typing. I'm ordering the best computer money can buy. And whatever else you need. We are going to get your life's work back, Ethan. And we are going to make Marcus Thorne pay for what he did. In that moment, they were no longer three separate, wounded people. They were a family, forged in a crucible of injustice and bound by a shared mission. The race had begun. The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic energy. A series of boxes began to arrive at the small apartment, their sleek, modern packaging a stark contrast to the worn surroundings. Clara had been true to her word. A state-of-the-art computer tower with a massive monitor, a bewildering array of cables and components, and specialized data recovery kits filled their small living room. For the first time in years, Ethan's space was filled not with medical bills and reminders of his limitations, but with tools of creation and possibility. An old fire, long dormant, was rekindled in his eyes. The despair that had been his constant companion was burned away by the heat of a new purpose. Okay, he said, his voice charged with an energy Clara hadn't heard before. Leo, I need you to be my hands. Clara, I need you to be my researcher. This is going to be a delicate operation. He directed them with the precision of a field marshal, his mind, once foggy with pain and depression, now razor-sharp. He guided Leo's smaller, more nimble fingers to carefully disassemble the old, broken laptop, instructing him on how to extract the hard drive without causing further damage. He had Clara looking up schematics for the 7-year-old piece of hardware, cross-referencing components, and downloading the sophisticated software he would need to perform a digital miracle. They worked through the day and into the night, the apartment illuminated by the glow of the new monitor. The air was thick with the smell of coffee, which Clara kept brewing, and the low hum of electronics. It was a race against a ticking clock they couldn't see, the ever-present threat of the eviction notice hanging over their heads. Ethan was a man transformed. He was no longer a victim in a wheelchair. He was a maestro conducting a complex symphony of code and hardware. He dictated commands to Leo, who typed them with a speed and accuracy that amazed them both. He was a natural, inheriting his father's innate understanding of the logic of machines. They hit wall after wall. The hard drive's platters were scratched. The boot sector was corrupted. Key data fragments were missing. With each setback, Ethan's frustration grew, but it was a different kind of frustration than he was used to. It wasn't the hopeless, weary frustration of a man beaten by life, it was the focused, determined frustration of a problem solver facing a worthy opponent. "It's no good," he grunted hours into the process, after another failed attempt to reconstruct a critical data block. "The damage is too extensive. We're missing the core index file." He slumped back in his chair, the fire in his eyes dimming. "It's over." Leo, who had been watching his father with unwavering focus, shook his head. "No, Dad. Remember what you told me? Think about it from a different angle." He pointed to one of the old notebooks, open to a page of dense, handwritten notes. "When you were teaching me chess, you said sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game. What if we don't need the whole file? What if we just need a piece of it?" Ethan stared at his son, then at the notebook. Leo was right. He had been trying to restore the entire drive, to rebuild his old digital workshop. But that wasn't the mission. The mission was to find one thing: the access point to the Helios core and the key to activate his ghost protocol. He had been so focused on reclaiming the past that he'd lost sight of the goal. A new strategy formed in his mind. It was a long shot, a wild, desperate gambit. Instead of repairing the damage, they would bypass it. He would write a new, custom program to scan the raw, chaotic data on the platters, looking not for files, but for a specific signature, a unique string of code he had embedded into the Helios kernel, a digital fingerprint that belonged only to him. It was like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. But he knew what the grain looked like. "You're a genius, Leo," Ethan said, a real, genuine smile spreading across his face. "A certified genius." The work began anew, with a renewed sense of urgency and hope. Ethan dictated, his voice a torrent of technical language and complex commands. Leo's fingers flew across the keyboard, translating his father's thoughts into reality. Clara kept them fueled, her presence a steady, calming force in the eye of their technological storm. They were a single unit, a three-person engine running on love, hope, and a burning desire for justice. As the first rays of dawn painted the gray city sky, a single line of text flashed on the screen: "Signature found. Kernel access granted." They had done it. They were in. The moment the words "Kernel access granted" flashed on the screen, a breathless silence fell over the room. They had breached the fortress. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. For 7 years, he had been locked out of his own creation, a ghost haunting the edges of a life that should have been his. Now, he was at the door. "Okay," he whispered, his voice trembling with a potent cocktail of fear and elation. "Now for the key." The screen displayed a simple, secure command prompt, a blinking cursor waiting patiently in a sea of black. This was the entrance to the back door he had built so long ago. It required a single, complex password, the alphanumeric sequence he had devised, a string of characters meaningless to anyone but him. It was a combination of his mother's birthday, the hospital room number where Leo was born, and the name of the first dog he ever had, all converted into a cryptographic hash. He recited the sequence aloud, a litany of his past, a prayer for his future. Leo's fingers danced across the keyboard, inputting the long, complex string with perfect accuracy. He hit enter. For a tense second, nothing happened. Then, the screen dissolved into a cascade of code, and a new interface appeared. It was titled Helios Protocol, Ghost Override. It featured 2 large, ominous buttons. One was red, labeled System Purge. The other was green, labeled Reclaim and Archive. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was real. After all this time, it was still here, waiting for him. "What's happening now?" Clara asked, her eyes wide, staring at the screen. "Thorn Industries is holding its annual shareholder and press conference today," Ethan said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. He pointed to a small clock on the override interface. "It starts in 5 minutes. Marcus will be on a stage, in front of the whole world, boasting about his record profits, about my record profits. He's going to announce a global expansion, a multi-billion-dollar deal to implement Helios in a dozen new countries. A slow, predatory smile spread across Ethan's face. It was the smile of a king who was about to checkmate his opponent in the most public way imaginable. "Leo," he said, his voice dropping to a low, powerful command. "Get the news feed up on your laptop. I want to see his face." Leo quickly pulled up the live stream. The screen showed a massive, opulent auditorium. Hundreds of journalists and investors were seated, their faces upturned towards a grand stage. And there, at the podium, basking in the spotlight, was Marcus Thorne. He was older, his face fuller, but it was the same arrogant, cruel sneer Leo remembered from the street. He looked smug, powerful, untouchable. "Today," Marcus began, his voice booming through the auditorium, "is a landmark day for Thorne Industries. It's a day where we celebrate not just our success, but our vision. A vision that has made us the undisputed global leader in green energy management." As Marcus continued his self-congratulatory speech, Ethan's gaze was fixed on the green button. "It's time," he whispered. His hand, which had trembled with weakness for so long, was now steady. He reached out and placed his finger on Leo's hand, which was resting on the mouse. "Together," Ethan said. They looked at each other, a father and a son, united in this singular moment of reclamation. And together, they clicked the mouse. On the live stream, the massive screen behind Marcus Thorne, which had been displaying the Thorne Industries logo, flickered violently. It went black for a split second, and then new text, written in a simple, stark white font, began to type itself across the screen, letter by letter. The Helios protocol was stolen. Its true creator is Ethan Collins. A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium. Marcus froze, his smile faltering as he turned to look at the screen behind him. The text continued, "Marcus Thorne orchestrated the accident that paralyzed Mr. Collins on May 12, 2017. All system data, including original source code, design notes, and evidence of the theft, is now being transferred to federal authorities. Thorne Industries is a lie." Panic erupted. On screens all over the world, Marcus Thorne's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His empire, built on a foundation of deceit, was crumbling around him in real time, in front of the entire world. He stammered, trying to speak, but no words came. The cameras zoomed in on his face as security personnel began moving towards the stage. In their tiny apartment, Ethan, Leo, and Clara watched, not with triumph, but with a quiet, solemn sense of justice fulfilled. The ghost had returned to his machine, and he had reclaimed his kingdom. The aftermath was swift and absolute. The public humiliation of Marcus Thorne was only the beginning. The data Ethan had unleashed was a digital bombshell, providing federal investigators with an undeniable and meticulously documented case of corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and aggravated assault. Thorne's assets were frozen, his company dismantled, and he was last seen in news footage being led away in handcuffs, his arrogant sneer finally wiped from his face, replaced by the hollow-eyed look of a man who had lost everything. The world, it turned out, had not forgotten how to choose right from wrong, it had just been waiting for the truth. For Ethan, Leo, and Clara, the next few months were a whirlwind. The courts quickly established Ethan as the sole creator and rightful owner of the Helios protocol. The fortune that Marcus Thorne had amassed was, in essence, Ethan's. Overnight, he went from a man begging on the street to one of the wealthiest tech innovators on the planet. But the money was never the pie, it was a tool, nothing more. The first thing Ethan did was move them out of the cramped, damp apartment and into a beautiful, light-filled house with a large garden. It wasn't a mansion, but a home, with warm wooden floors and big windows that let the sun stream in. The second thing he did was seek out the best neurological and physical therapy specialists in the world. The journey was long and arduous, filled with pain and frustration, but this time Ethan was not alone. Clara was by his side for every grueling session, her steady presence a constant source of strength. Leo was his ever-present cheerleader, celebrating every small victory, every flicker of movement, every hard-won step. 6 months after Marcus's downfall, a party was held in the garden of their new home. It wasn't a lavish affair, but a simple gathering of the few people who mattered. Ethan stood near the barbecue, leaning on a simple wooden cane, but standing on his own 2 feet. The storm clouds were gone from his eyes, replaced by a clear, calm sky. He was smiling, a real, easy smile that reached his eyes, as he flipped burgers, his movements still careful but filled with a newfound confidence. Leo, now 13, was laughing as he chased a soccer ball across the lush green grass, his face free from the old, weary burden he had carried for so long. He was just a boy again, his world once more a universe of simple certainties. Clara stood beside Ethan, her hand resting gently on his arm. The professional distance between them had long since dissolved, replaced by a deep, quiet love that had been forged in their shared fight for justice. They didn't need to speak of it, it was there in every shared glance, every gentle touch. Later, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Ethan gathered everyone. He announced the official launch of his new company, Helios Reborn, which would continue his life's work of creating a sustainable future. But he had a second announcement. "My greatest fortune," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Clara, "is not the money I've recovered. It was the kindness of a stranger who saw a broken man and his son and chose to help. It's a debt I can never truly repay, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying." He revealed his new philanthropic venture, the Clara Vance Foundation for Accessible Healthcare, a multi-billion-dollar organization dedicated to ensuring that no one is ever denied the care they need because they can't afford it. Its first project would be to build a state-of-the-art community clinic, 100 times the size of Clara's old one, which she would run. Tears streamed down Clara's face as Ethan made the announcement. She had only ever wanted to help people, and now she would have the resources to change thousands of lives. Leo came and wrapped his arms around both of them, and for a moment, they stood there, bathed in the warm light of the setting sun, a father who had reclaimed his strength, a doctor who had rediscovered her purpose, and a boy whose unwavering love had been the catalyst for it all. They were no longer broken pieces. They were a family, a true-found family, made whole not by the absence of scars, but by the way their jagged edges fit perfectly together, creating something stronger and more beautiful than before. This story is a powerful reminder that the darkest night often comes just before the dawn. It teaches us that integrity and love are forces more powerful than greed and cruelty. Ethan and Leo were at their lowest point, stripped of everything but each other. But it was in that darkness that their true strength was forged. Leo's unwavering love for his father gave him the courage to act, and his promise was the spark that ignited a revolution in their lives. Clara's single act of compassion, stopping for a boy with a broken bird, was the drop of water that started a tidal wave of change. She didn't just buy a carving, she invested in humanity. She saw worth where the world saw none. What does this story say to you? It says that you should never, ever give up hope. It tells us that the person you are inside, your character, your talent, your love, is your true wealth, and no one can ever steal that from you. It reminds us that justice may be slow, but it is inevitable for those who fight for it. The world may seem indifferent, but one person, one act of kindness, can be enough to light up the darkness and change everything. Let this story be a fire in your heart. Remember Ethan's resilience, Leo's loyalty, and Clara's compassion. Carry their story with you, and let it inspire you to be the person who stops, the person who sees, the person who helps. Because you never know when your small act of kindness might be the key that unlocks someone else's entire world. Thank you for joining us on Soul Lift Stories. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with someone who needs a little hope today. And please, tell us in the comments below, what was the most powerful moment in this story for you? We read every single comment and your stories inspire us. Until next time, be the light.